This is the Kia EV4, and in this review we're going to be talking about what it is like to drive, the different batteries, the range, some of the competitors, some of the fancy technology that's gone into it, and also just seeing what it would be like to live with. This is the Done Deal YouTube channel. We are in Spain. Now let's get into it. So the EV4 has a lot of rivals because it is technically Kia's first ever fully electric hatchback. So think about the Peugeot E308, the Cooper Born, ID3, the Opel Astra. There is tons in this segment. However, this has the longest range, and we'll get into what that is in a short moment. It also has some really nice technology. It's got their 4th generation battery, which means it's now more robust, reliable, and efficient than ever before. Now, in terms of that range, let's talk about the batteries. Actually, first, let's talk about the fact that this location for a charge port, in my opinion, is one of the best. Easy to get those short cables in and plugged in. And like a lot of EVs, whichever version you get takes about a half an hour to go from 10 to 80%. However, let's talk about battery sizes. There's gonna be two options, a short range and a long range. The short range is 58.3 kilowatt hours and has a range of up to 440 kilometers. On the bigger side of things, we have an 81.4 kilowatt hour battery, and that one is a staggering 625 kilometers range, which is huge. In fact, it's Kia's longest ever ranged EV. However, there is actually the ability to go longer, and to explain that, we need to go to the back. So, back here, you'll notice this is a traditional hatchback, and it works really well, and personally it's the one I would go for. However, if you like something called the fastback, that is also possible, and because of the way that roof slopes down a little bit more, you can actually get a little bit more range, up to 633 kilometers range on the larger battery, which is very impressive. However, let me know in the comments which one you would choose. So to drive, it is very good in summary, and it's just remarkably smooth. We actually got into one the moment we landed, and it just had a nice calm feel to it. The other thing that I definitely want to point out at this stage in the review is the ventilated seats. At home we just take these for granted, and it's just another random thing on a spec option between GT line and Earth or whatever it might be. However, in Spain it is glorious because it's very hot outside. In addition to that, it is really smooth to drive, as I mentioned. It's a lovely size car, it's not overly big. You don't feel like you're driving some massive SUV that you're going to curb the wheels or knock a wing mirror. There's also brilliant 360-degree cameras, which just make life a million times easier. In terms of the power output, there's a 150 kilowatt electric motor which goes to the front wheels. I think it'll do 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in roughly 7.7 seconds. I think slightly faster if you get the smaller battery, but all that doesn't really matter too much. In the real world, it has plenty of power. It's very smooth. It's got good visibility, well improved by the cameras. Even when you indicate right or left, a little camera of your blind spot comes up. It is super. In addition to that, I want to talk about the efficiency of this car, because in Ireland we're very quick to say, oh yeah, but in the winter you won't get that kind of range. However, what I have learnt in the last couple of years is that in the summer you also won't, because you need the air conditioning. I've had to blast the AC in this car because, as I mentioned, I'm an Irish person and it's extortionately hot here in Spain. However, I'm still averaging about 15 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is pretty decent. That is basically this car being driven by a multitude of journalists who, let's call a spade, are probably blasting the AC or accelerating quite aggressively and not using this as efficiently as you would in the real world. So that is a good sign. In terms of all the ADAS features, which are safety equipment, it has pretty much every single one you could ever imagine, which is great for safety. However, some of them, as you may know if you've driven a car kind of post 22, 23, are a bit annoying. So you can turn them off at a button, your speed recognition sign, if you hold this down for a few seconds. The same with your lane assist. This monitor here, it's not quite a camera, but it, I suppose, uses sensors to detect my face. And if I find myself looking at the satellite navigation just a little bit too long or in a bit too much detail like I am now, it will let me know by beeping at me, which is frustrating. One other thing that's quite unusual for me is there's a lovely heads-up display in front of me here. However, if I sit up straight, the very top of it is actually cut off, and I'm not the world's tallest person, and the seat is at its lowest position, which is something that never really happened to me before, because I'm only 5'10". But as a whole, as a hatchback car that I can imagine driving around Ireland and in around Dublin, it's pretty great. Now the interior in here, it's very familiar if you've been in a Kia in the last couple of years. I really like it. It's a very comfortable seating position. This steering wheel, you can get it as a 2-spoke or a 3-spoke depending on which spec you go for. The other thing I want to talk about is this floating section here. Lovely. Now, in terms of materials throughout this car, there's 10 different recycled materials, which just mean that it is that bit more environmentally friendly, which does make a big difference. Now, this wraparound screen here is great. You've got all your maps up there that connects up Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. It all works seamlessly. Then there's a little 5.3-inch screen, I think it is here, and that has your climate control, and you can hit it up and get a bigger screen if you need it. And then you've got all your key driving information in front of you. As a whole, a lovely interior, well thought out, environmentally friendly, and I think most importantly, very comfortable. And one other thing I want to add is they've managed to make the rear have more legroom than a Tesla Model 3, which is great. And if you're a taxi driver, something that might entice you. I do want to talk about suspension. To begin with, these Michelin tires actually are made specifically for the EV4 here in Europe. But the wheels and the suspension they're attached to is also very sophisticated. It's called the McPherson suspension, if I'm not mistaken. And what that means is it's a lot more dynamic, a lot lighter, and a lot more sophisticated. A couple of things to talk about. The lower control arm, fully aluminium, means lower unsprung weight. That means better handling. But in addition to that, there is hydro bushings, and that essentially means it will absorb any little minor imperfections in the road, which means a smoother ride. And there's even bushings between the suspension and the top mounts, which just absorb everything, make it a smoother ride, and you really can feel that when you're out on the road. So in conclusion, the EV4, it's a brilliant car. In fact, it probably is one of the best in its class. I expect, or I think Kia expect, that the hatchback will be the most popular in Europe, both because of demand, but also very interestingly, the hatchback is built for Europe in Europe. Specifically Slovakia, which is quite nice. They've got over 3,700 employees in a factory there and lots of robotics to ensure that this is made to its best capability in Europe. It also has all your usual things like vehicle to load and everything else that you might need in the real world. However, if you've got any questions whatsoever, feel free to comment below. But for now, that is it from us. We are going to go sit in the air conditioning with the ventilated seats on and cool back down.